Texas 21, which Wendy is running for, is one of the districts that UT belongs to, as well as Texas 25, which Julie Oliver is running for. And so we're really excited to be hosting this conversation as students with someone who could potentially and will be our next elected representative. So I kind of want to just start out with a few questions, and I think Kyle has the first one, so I'm going to let him take that one.
Hi, yeah, Wendy, I wanted to talk to you about in 2019, you formed a work group with now State Senator Sarah Eckert that was focused on sexual assault prevention and healing. Can you tell us a little bit more about your motivation for creating that group and what you were able to achieve?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, first of all, to all of you for having me tonight. Delaney and Anna Merriman Stewart, who are on tonight, were such an important part of the advocacy work that we've done at Deeds Not Words, which is an organization I founded a few years ago to try to help young women learn the skills and tools needed to advocate for the change that they wanted to see. And we've been very happy to be joined by a few extraordinary young men in that process as well. And this issue, the issue of sexual assault survivor recovery, and particularly prevention and response of sexual assault on our college campuses has formed a great deal of the work that they've done. And I'm so proud of them. And I want you to use their work as an example of what we are all capable of achieving if we decide that we are going to step up and use our power. It can be very intimidating, and I know the young women at Deeds would certainly say this, to appear in a legislative panel, to sit down before a committee of elected officials. It's usually the case that those rooms are set up very specifically so that you feel intimidated. The decision makers are sitting in an elevated dais and you are sitting on the floor, not on the floor, but at a table below them. And to seek the kind of change that you want to see from lawmakers can be very, very challenging. But the magic happens when you move your power into that room by sharing your personal experiences, your personal narratives, and an understanding that the folks you are talking to aren't necessarily ones who are hostile to the things that are important to you, but perhaps they haven't had an opportunity to walk in your shoes and see things the way that you see them. I'm so proud of the work that our mostly young women have done at Deeds Not Words. They've passed and been a significant part of passing 25 bills into law in the last 2 legislative sessions alone. And as I said, so much of that was focused very specifically on prevention of sexual assault and response to sexual assault on our college campuses. And now, I'm sorry, Kyle, for the long-winded answer, but to get to your question, I was invited to be a part of a working group in Travis County because of my experience in the state Senate working on this issue, and of course, the continued work that we did through Deeds Not Words. One of the most important things that I was able to achieve as a state senator, one of the things I'm most proud of, was the fact that I was able to get an audit of our law enforcement evidence rooms around the state to determine what our backlog of rape kits looked like. And we discovered that we had about 20,000 untested kits. We also discovered, of course, that many of those actually had passed the statute of limitations for being able to do anything about a remedy, even if the kit was tested. And that really launched a lot of the work I did in the state Senate, passing multiple bills into law to address that very situation. Here in Travis County, such a progressive place, it was surprising to learn that people who had met the criminal justice system as a survivor of assault hadn't been met with the kind of justice that they deserve. And I was able to work with some of the amazing groups on the ground who have already really put their power and their energy and their effort forward to make change and to lead some conversations trying to heal divides that had happened between law enforcement, between our prosecutorial teams, and to the survivor organizations that were making sure that their voices were heard. I honestly believe that one of the reasons we just saw a DA candidate win in the primary runoff recently was because people were dissatisfied with the way this issue was being handled in Travis County. And of course, Jose Garza, now our Democratic nominee, and very likely going to be our next DA, I think he understands that that mantle was put in front of him to take very seriously and to work very actively on. And I trust that he's going to do it. And I'm proud to have been a part of helping to set the table for the work that he has ahead.
Awesome. And then shifting a little bit, so in May of this year, Betsy DeVos, who is the current leader of the Department of Education, announced during a pandemic a ton of changes to Title IX, which is what protects survivors of sexual assault at universities across the country and allows them to have their case investigated by their school. Some of the changes that she announced included limiting the definition of what is considered sexual assault under Title IX, requiring complainants to be examined or interrogated by a representative of the respondent. And to me, the most horrifying change was that schools wouldn't be required to investigate instances of sexual misconduct that occur off campus. And I wanted to know, as a future Congresswoman, what's your response to these changes, and what do you think we can do right now to best support survivors on college campuses around the country?
So clearly, and that's such a great question. Thank you, Delaney, for the work that you've done on this issue. What Betsy DeVos has done in office has been not only disappointing, but devastating to a great deal of work that had taken years to accomplish in terms of policy changes that were intended to be supportive of survivors, while of course respecting the due process rights of those who were being accused. And I agree with you, Delaney, that these shifts are ones that actually upset the balance of power in that process in a way that is going to do a dramatic disservice to young women and young men on our college campuses who are victims of sexual assault. I think that Congress, hopefully we're going to seat a Democratic House, Senate, and President. I think we're going to see, excuse me, some dramatic changes to reverse what has really been an overreach by Betsy DeVos. Most importantly, if we have an opportunity to elect Joe Biden, his work on this issue has been extensive. And of course, It's on Us was something that grew out of his personal work trying to address this issue. So I'm looking forward to being a part of that solution. One of the most important things that has to change is the fact that sexual assault instances of sexual assault that do not happen on college campuses can no longer be investigated by colleges, even where the person who is alleging the assault and the person who is claimed to be the assaulter are both students, even if they're at an on-campus or, excuse me, an off-campus event that's sponsored by the school. It's just absurd. And we know that the vast majority of sexual assaults in our college settings do happen outside the campus dormitory setting itself. And to completely foreclose the opportunity to address assaults in those circumstances is just such a disservice to the survivors who deserve justice and deserve to have a legitimate hearing of the traumas that they've experienced.
Thank you for answering that, Wendy. Um, a minute ago, you talked about how you were able to get an audit of law enforcement in Travis County. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the legislation that you authored while you were a state senator that was aimed at reducing our rape kit backlog in Texas. What legislation do you plan to support in Congress to support survivors at a national level?
So I think we're going to have a cohesive system of laws. Right now, we really don't. It's state by state by state. And one of the great challenges that we have is the resources, the financial resources needed to actually go back and test all of those untested kits. It's actually quite expensive. It's about $600 per test to $1,000 per test. And that's a lot of money. It also has been a challenge because having the laboratory resources available to actually do the analysis that's required has seen a tremendous shortage and therefore an incredible backlog of kits that have been tested. So the first thing that we really sought to do was to address making sure that in our state budget, we were putting resources forward to be able to test this backlog. We also were benefited in many of our local communities, and I'm pretty sure Travis County was one of them, by federal dollars that came down to local communities to help partner with them to address this very issue. But then on a go forward basis, one of the proudest pieces of legislation that I passed was making sure that we didn't create a backlog all over again, that we weren't solving a backlog while building another one right on top of it. So now in Texas, it is law that within 30 days, a kit must be tested. And if it's not tested, of course, information needs to be provided to the survivor and to a prosecutorial office about why that hasn't yet occurred. And I'm proud to say that for the most part, that's been working really well. Again, one of the challenges has been making sure that we have the resources for crime labs to be able to do that. And that's a state problem and it's a federal problem because once again, it's a funding challenge. And it's one that I hope that we can meet if I have the privilege of serving in Congress.
Great. Thank you for that answer. If anyone, we're going to open up for questions now. So if anyone has a question they want to ask, feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat and we will ask Wendy for you. And we will also be continuing with some of our own questions. So right now we are kind of in the middle of a national conversation about police violence and the way that the police deal with communities in the United States. And unfortunately, many survivors turn to the police for help after a traumatizing assault. And often instead of feeling protected by the police, they often feel re-traumatized and hurt after making the brave decision to report their situation and experience to law enforcement. What policies do you think we can push forward to make survivors feel safe when reporting their assault to law enforcement?
So it's just so important that survivors are taken seriously, that they are heard. And one of the great deal of work and effort that has been happening in Travis County and elsewhere is to provide our officers and our prosecutors with the training to intake people who have been victimized by sexual assault, and to do that in a way that respects the experience that that person has just endured. If you've seen the movie, and I'm sure some of you have, that Mariska Hargitay was the executive producer for, it's called I Am Evidence. And it's such a sobering picture of how women and men who are sexual assault victims are treated in the system, with police officers and prosecutors who often do not believe their experiences or even if they do believe that a sexual assault occurred, lay blame on the feet or at the feet of the very person who experienced that assault. One of the things that I worked on in the Texas Senate and unfortunately hasn't passed yet, Senator Watson worked very hard on it last session, was on our jury instructions, and to instruct our juries that if a person has been incapacitated in any way, shape, or form by alcohol or drugs, that is not to be considered as a part of a sexual assault survivor somehow being responsible for what's happened to them, and asking or instructing juries not to consider that as part of the evidence that they're considering in determining someone's guilt. It's incredibly important. We all know the stories, and we all understand that in every justice system across this country, it has certainly been the case that women are blamed for their own assaults, that men are blamed for their own assaults, where they've had several drinks. Maybe they even made a decision to get in a car with someone or to go home with them. But never, ever, ever is there an excuse for someone to be a victim of assault. And we have to work on the way our prosecutors and our police understand and view that. A lot of that is training, and some of it, honestly, will be through statutory changes that are very much needed.
Thank you, Wendy. Earlier, we talked a little bit about your work with Deeds Not Words and that program. And I just want to give you another opportunity to talk a little bit more about that, and also to share with us some things you believe that young people, and especially young survivors of sexual violence, some things that they can do to make a difference at the state level and also at the federal level.
So I've seen that in action, Kyle. Young people who have had these traumatizing experiences, and everyone, of course, heals differently from that. And for some people, it doesn't make sense to invite them to come forward and share that experience in an effort to try to help change policy. But for those who do feel that that's empowering, that that's a way not only to help heal, but also, of course, to correct what happens in the future, it can be a very powerful experience for a legislator to hear from someone who has had this shattering experience in their life and who can share why policy needs to change. As I said earlier, oftentimes when legislators are making decisions, it's not because they're purposefully being tone deaf or purposefully ignoring our experiences or our needs. It's simply that they don't understand through their own worldview why things need to change. And our personal narratives can be such an important part of helping to make sure that we inform their understanding and we do make change. And I'm so proud of the young people who have been a part of the advocacy work of Deeds Not Words, and who, as I said, really mustered a lot of courage to sit in committee hearings and share personal pain and personal experiences in order to shape change. And I'm also proud to say that no matter who was listening to them, whether they were Republican or Democrat, whether they were Anglo or of a racial minority group, whether they were younger as a legislator or older as a legislator, every legislator that I saw listening to the young people who came and testified before them on these particular issues treated our advocates with tremendous respect and took their experiences to heart and helped make the changes that needed to happen in law. And it wasn't just college-age students coming and bringing their truths forward, it was high school students as well. I can't imagine, quite honestly, at that age, having the courage to do something like that. And if I'm proud of one thing in my public service career and the work that I've done at Deeds Not Words, it's been the fact that I've been able to help encourage young people to own your power and to bring it forward in a way that can powerfully instruct change. That happens, of course, through advocacy, but it also happens through voting. And I would encourage every one of you to please, take a look at what your candidates are saying on issues like this or other issues that matter greatly to you, and use your power to put someone in office whose values align with yours and who you know is going to fight for you. And even if they don't speak specifically to an issue that is the most important one that you care about, listen for their capacity to listen. Listen and watch for their capacity to be thoughtful and caring about the public service that they provide. And you're much more likely to find someone willing to learn from you and to fight for you in a person that fits that description.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. This is just another reminder, if you have any questions, to pop them in the chat or unmute yourself. But I do have a question. This is from my friend Pooja, who is a Texan but is now attending UC Berkeley in California. And she kind of wants to know, how do you foresee Texas politics overall changing during and after this current election cycle?
I think we're going to see some really dramatic shifts in Texas this cycle. One of the things that's really important, really crucially important, if you don't vote at any other level on your ballot, even if you decide you don't want to vote in the congressional race that I'm running in right now, please vote in the races for your state reps. In Texas, we need to flip 9 more seats from Republican to Democrat. We flipped 12 last cycle. And we did that because we had a greater voter turnout and participation than we've seen in a midterm, probably ever, honestly, in our state. If we flip those 9 seats, we finally will have a voice in redistricting. Redistricting will be taken up immediately in 2021 in January by this next legislature, this next state legislature. And they're going to decide how our districts are drawn. We all know that gerrymandering can be used as a tool to silence our voices, to silence our capacity to elect people who will reflect and represent the values that we care about. And making sure that we get that majority in the Texas House to balance the conversation for the first time in a couple of decades, and to have a voice in making sure that districts are drawn more fairly, is going to be incredibly important. We have 17 seats, House seats right now, state House seats that are in play. 9 of them were won by Beto in 2018. And as you can imagine, those are kind of the top focuses of the 9 that we're trying to flip. But there are 17 in total that we have an opportunity to flip. And I hope you'll talk to each other, to your peers, about the fact that voting all the way down your ballot is incredibly important. This is the first time in Texas election history that we will not be allowed to vote a straight party ticket. I have to admit to you that I always take great joy in going down my entire ballot and voting for every candidate that has excited me and earned my trust. But a lot of people have been in the habit of going in and voting just, pulling a D lever or an R lever. You won't have the opportunity to do that this time. And we need you to please take seriously not just who's going to represent us in the White House, but at every level of government, including your city councils and your school boards. And maybe you feel a little bit unsure about that. One thing I can recommend to you is the League of Women Voters Voting Guide. They are a nonpartisan group. They invite candidates to answer questions, and they publish the answers to those questions from candidates at every level. And if you're curious about who to support, go look at the League of Women Voters Guide. You can also look at organizations that you respect and you follow to have done the hard work for you. Perhaps that's a group that's working for criminal justice reform, or a group that's working to make sure that we support public education. Whatever it is, there are groups at every one of those areas of interest that advocate and endorse candidates, and you can trust that they've done the hard work for you to determine whether that candidate aligns with that particular issue. So please do that homework if you feel a little bit unsure about who you're going to be voting for, and please do vote your entire ballot.
All right, Wendy, thank you for centering that on local elections, because of course those are very important and often overlooked by voters. Just to bring it back to a national level, of course, we're all aware that Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away on Friday. And in the wake of that, the Republican-controlled Senate has committed to voting on a new justice before the presidential election. I just wanted to ask, and of course that has implications for Roe versus Wade, which often, unfortunately, goes hand in hand with survivor justice, because access to abortion is an incredibly important part of women's health in general. I just wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on both the vote for the new justice that's going to take place before the election, and just any other thoughts you have on Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy with regards to women's rights?
Well, I guess I'll begin the answer with what Justice Ginsburg asked of us as she conveyed to her granddaughter a request that a new justice not be seated until our president, whomever that will be, is seated and sworn in or re-sworn in January, depending on the outcome of that race. And I wish that wish had been respected after the many years of incredible service that she provided to this country. And of course, considering the decision that was made not to hear and confirm Merrick Garland when he was put forward, with a much longer period of time left available for that confirmation to happen than we face right now. If we do see the appointment of a new justice, and it's very likely that we will, and it's very likely that that justice will not adhere to some of the things that I imagine most of us on this call tonight believe in, we're going to have real challenges on our hands. You know, we all learned in middle school government about the three legs of the stool: the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. It's always been my privilege as a lawyer to be inspired by and believe in the fact that when the will of the minority, particularly that is allowed through the gerrymandering of districts and electoral outcomes that happen, it's always been my great faith that the legal system, the judicial system, has provided the correction where those imbalances occur. Now, I believe that our judicial system is going to be greatly imbalanced, and we're going to see some tremendous consequences from that. And that means that it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we strengthen the other legs of that stool. I think it's going to be incredibly important that we seat a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic president, because in order to balance what is likely to come from the Supreme Court, we are going to have that kind of strength and unity to achieve that. One of the most important questions before the Supreme Court right now is the continued vitality, the continued existence of the Affordable Care Act. And here, in the midst of a pandemic that has now claimed over 200,000 American lives, and of course has absolutely wreaked havoc on our economy, leaving so many people in very dire circumstances right now. The fact that this Supreme Court will make a decision in the midst of this crisis to tear apart the only healthcare that hundreds of thousands, millions, literally, of Americans rely on is it's hard to comprehend, but it very well may happen. And if we don't have a Senate, a House, and a President who are committed to making sure that we immediately get to work providing the healthcare supports that are needed, we're going to be thrown into an even greater crisis than I think any of us can imagine right now. And yes, women's reproductive rights is going to be an important part of that conversation. More than 70% of Americans say they want Roe v. Wade to be left alone, but it's likely that it won't be, and that a statutory remedy is going to be required. It's also likely that the things that we've been working so hard to achieve, to get money out of politics, to have fair redistricting, and to end voter suppression tactics, won't find any home for remedy in the Supreme Court, and instead, again, will be a statutory remedy for us to make sure that we bring forward. So there's so much riding on this election, more than we ever imagined that there was going to be before this weekend with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I hope as you talk to your friends, your family, everyone in your social circle, you'll help them understand that we cannot exercise the privileged attitude that our voices don't count and that they won't matter, and that our perfect candidate wasn't put forward and therefore we're not going to vote. We must vote because the future of our country depends on it more than it ever has, quite honestly.
All right, thank you, Wendy. At this time, I again want to ask if anyone else has a question that they'd like to share. Again, you can send it via chat or you can unmute yourself and ask Wendy directly. And if no one does, then Wendy, I just want to ask if you have anything else that you would like to say.
Well, I'm just so grateful to you, Kyle, and to you, Delaney, for organizing this event this evening. It always inspires me when young people are at the lead of, at the front of, at the center of the conversations that we're having about important policy shifts in this country. And to everyone else who joined us tonight, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts and perspectives with you. And please go vote. I keep a little tearaway calendar. Everyone on my campaign has one of these. We have 42 days left. See, Natalie's got hers. We have 42 days left until the election. 22 days prior to that, early vote starts on October the 13th. So that's 20 days from now. It's literally right around the corner. And as Michelle Obama advised or counseled us as part of the Democratic National Convention, be prepared. Take your lunch, take your dinner, take something to sit on, take a blanket if it's chilly outside. Let's all decide that we're going to use our power to make the kind of change that we want to see and that we deserve. Thank you.
I believe Natalie actually has a quick question.
Yeah, Wendy, I want you to add on. I know we were speaking a lot about like survivors of sexual assault, and I think we saw something really big what happened with Vanessa Guillen in Fort Hood, and how those things are going to change. So the I Am Vanessa bill is going to come in. Will you talk a little bit about like the intersection of what happens with the military and also like everyday survivors?
Sure. I think the simplest way, Natalie, to talk about that and describe it is imbalance of power. I mean, often when we see sexual assault occur, it's because there's an imbalance of power. And there's been a lot of energy and effort expended on trying to make sure that the appropriate balance exists in our military. For victims of sexual assault to feel that they have a vehicle to bring that forward, to be heard, and to receive the remedy that they deserve. And that bill, of course, is one that's going to work at making sure we correct the failures in that system right now. But in some ways, it really does have a common thread to other instances where we see sexual assault. And we all have to be deeply attentive to that and to be working to try to address that as best we can.
Awesome. Thank you for your question, Natalie. Again, I just kind of wanted to reiterate what Wendy said. It's super important that we all take our voices to the ballot box this fall. Wendy did allude to this, but the voter registration deadline is on October 5th, and you have until October 23rd to request a mail-in ballot. That's super important as we are in a pandemic right now, and for some people, especially those who are immunocompromised, voting by mail is your best option. So please check those out. Again, early voting starts on October 13th and lasts until October 30th. I always try to vote early because the lines are super short. So if you don't want to wait in line, I suggest you vote early as possible. And again, obviously Election Day is on November 3rd. And then I also suggest that you volunteer with Wendy's campaign. I've done it. It's super easy. You can send out texts and you can send phone calls, and it's super important that campaigns really get the support that they need right now, because obviously we cannot meet in person as we are in the midst of a global pandemic. So in honoring RBG's legacy, really pick a campaign, whether it's Wendy's or, like she mentioned, one of those 9 state House seats that we need to flip the Texas House. Pick a campaign, volunteer for them, donate if you can, because it's going to take all hands on deck this fall to make the change that we want to see. But thank you all so much for coming out. It really means a lot to me that everyone came and had this conversation, which sometimes can be difficult, but is super important nonetheless. So thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Natalie, for helping me put this together.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe.